It has been said that the most effective way to destroy a people is to deny and obliterate their own understanding of their history. For once a people's history is destroyed and left in the past, those in the future are ignorant that anything was ever different. As George Orwell so eloquently concluded in his book 1984, that the masses never revolt of their own accord, and they never revolt merely because they are oppressed. Indeed, so long as they are not permitted to have standards of comparison, they never even become aware that they are oppressed. In modern-day America, it is of the utmost importance that we rediscover our forgotten history, that we learn and see for ourselves that things used to be different. For in our present day, George Orwell's 1984 seems more like a prophetic scripture than fictional novel. Warrantless mass surveillance of emails, online activity, and metadata, law enforcement agencies equipped with drones, armored vehicles, tanks, and military-grade weaponry, courts jailing citizens for profit over victimless crimes, no-knock raids, confiscation of children, firearms, and personal property without due process and without any legal wrongdoing, bottomless pits of criminal codes, family codes, tax codes, and welfare codes enrich state agencies and their agents at the expense of ordinary citizens. This has all become commonplace in America today, and these measures are carried out under the guise that it is for our benefit and security. Orwell was right. It then begs the question, when the government becomes tyrannical and oppressive towards the very citizens it purports to serve, what do we do? The answer lies in a piece of history that is forgotten and unknown to most Americans. Let us look to their example and let it inspire us to take action, as the brave men did at the Battle of Athens. The Battle of Athens occurred in the small farming town of Athens, Tennessee, located in McMinn County on August 1st through 2nd of 1946. However, the story actually begins in the 1930s, with the state of Tennessee and local county governments falling to the control of Southern Democrat bosses, or as we would call them, politicians. The ringleader was a Democrat by the name of Edward Hull Crump, known as Boss. He served as mayor of Memphis, Tennessee from 1910 through 1915, but he would create and father the most powerful and tyrannical political machine the state of Tennessee had ever seen, only to be rivaled by our present-day government. It was through this machine that Boss Crump would dominate Tennessee politics for most of the first half of the 20th century. Easy to do when you've got the governor's office and a United States senator in your back pocket, in addition to the fact that Boss Crump effectively elected every mayor in Tennessee from 1915 to 1954. Like most government stooges, what Boss Crump's political machine lacked in brains, they more than made up for with the use of ballot manipulation, patronage for friends, intimidation, and violence to control their constituents and their opposition. Boss Crump's reach extended to Athens, Tennessee, and McMinn County through Paul Cantrell, a Democrat who was elected as sheriff of McMinn County in 1936, 1938, and 1940. Cantrell would later go on to become the U.S. Senator in Boss Crump's back pocket, winning elections in 1942 and 1944. Control would be maintained in Athens, with Cantrell's former deputy and fellow Democrat Pat Mansfield being elected as the new sheriff of McMinn County. Through the early 40s, Boss Crump's political machine would centralize government power by reducing the number of voting precincts from 23 to 12 and reducing the number of justices of the peace from 14 to 7, with 4 of those 7 being allied to Sheriff and U.S. Senator Paul Cantrell. To make matters worse, Sheriff Cantrell, Mansfield, and their deputies were paid under a financial incentive fee system, where they received money for every person they arrested, booked, and released. The more people they arrested, the more money they made. This, of course, led to nothing short of state-sponsored extortion, theft, racketeering, kidnapping, and ransom under color of law. as the sheriff and their deputies became fee grabbers rather than fulfilling their duty as public servants. Exacerbating the tyranny and government corruption in McMinn County was the fact that World War II was in full swing. About 3,000 young men from Athens and McMinn County were off fighting in the European and Pacific theaters. However, things had gotten so bad in McMinn County that word was actually getting back to some of the local boys off fighting in the war. While the war was raging, 2 servicemen on leave in McMinn County were gunned down and killed by Cantrell supporters. The soldiers of McMinn County had heard about what happened, and naturally they were anxious to return home and address the situation. As World War II drew to a close in 1945, the stage was set for a confrontation, as the McMinn County GIs began to be demobilized, discharged, and sent home by 1946. The GIs were immediately targeted by Sheriff Cantrell and his deputies. These fee grabbers knew the GIs were coming home with their mustering out pay, and the sheriff and his men wanted that money. The deputies were running around arresting every GI they could get their hands on for any reason they could come up with. One GI recalled, "There were several beer joints and honky-tonks around Athens. We were pretty wild. We started having trouble with law enforcement at that time because they started making a habit of picking up GIs and fining them heavily for most anything. They were kind of making a racket out of it." After long, hard years of service, most of us were hardcore veterans of World War II. We were used to drinking our liquor and our beer without being molested. When these things happened, the GIs got madder. The more GIs they arrested, the more they beat up, the madder we got. In the early months of 1946, the McMinn County World War II veterans had seen enough tyranny from their local and state government. They began organizing, having secret meetings, and created their own political party called the GI Nonpartisan League. They chose candidates for 5 different offices, but all the attention was centered on the race for sheriff between Knox Henry, a GI candidate who had served in the North African campaign, and Paul Cantrell. Having been informed of the rampant ballot manipulation and voter fraud that had been perpetrated while the GIs were deployed, they ran their political campaign on the slogan, "Your vote will be counted as cast." The GIs drove vehicles with loudspeakers, handed out pamphlets, and put up posters with that slogan. They were going to make damn sure that there would be a proper accounting of the ballots in this coming election. Not only were the veterans of McMinn County mobilized and ready to stand watch over the polls, but they had also organized veterans from neighboring Blount County to come help as well. Cantrell and Mansfield saw this coming, and they had begun building an army of their own as well. They paid 200 deputies from neighboring counties $50 per day to patrol the streets of Athens and McMinn County, use intimidation tactics against any opposition, and to ensure that the ballot boxes made it back to the local jail, where votes could be counted in secret as to ensure that Cantrell would win the election. Bill White, resident of McMinn County and battle-hardened veteran of World War II, was elected to recruit and form what would be called the Fighting Bunch. This group was prepared and standing by if things went south on election day. Bill White stated in an interview, "You get the poor boys out of poor families, and the ones that was frontline warriors that's done fighting, and didn't care to bust a cap on you. I had 30 men. I took what mustering out pay I got and bought pistols." August 1st, 1946. It was election day in McMinn County, and an unprecedented number of voters turned out to cast their ballot. The situation escalated quickly. At 9:30 a.m., a legally appointed poll watcher and GI supporter by the name of Walter Ellis had been arrested by Cantrell's deputies and thrown in jail for trying to protest irregularities he observed at his polling station. 2 more poll watchers, Charles Scott and Ed Vestal, were also taken captive by deputies. They both escaped by jumping through a glass window into the street and moving into the crowd. At the 12th Precinct polling station, a Cantrell deputy tried to allow an underage voter to cast a ballot with no poll tax receipt who was not listed in the voter registration. GI poll watcher Bob Harriel, a one-armed veteran who had seen action in North Africa, protested. Cantrell's deputy hit him over the head with a blackjack, brutally beat him, then closed the polling station and took the ballot box back to the jail. Around 3 p.m., Commander Wendy Wise, a Cantrell patrolman, prevented an elderly African-American farmer, Tom Gillespie, from casting his ballot at the Athens Waterworks polling place. When Gillespie and a GI poll watcher objected, Wise struck Gillespie with brass knuckles, which caused Gillespie to drop his ballot and run away from the deputy. Wise then pulled his pistol and shot Gillespie in the back. The GIs had done everything in their power to seek a diplomatic resolution. Not only did they engage in the political process, but they also reached out to the federal government, as well as the local FBI field office for help regarding the rampant abuses and illegal activity of the local government. Their requests for help fell on deaf ears. They were on their own, and it was time to act. Bill White mobilized his fighting bunch, and right off the bat they captured and disarmed 7 deputies. Wanting to give these thieves a taste of their own medicine, the GIs took the deputies out to the woods where they beat them and chained them to trees to keep them from coming back into town. Around 6 p.m., Bill led his fighting bunch to the National Guard Armory, where they loaded up with 60 rifles, 2 Thompson submachine guns, and as much 30-06 and 45 ACP ammo as they could find. When White and the rest of the fighting bunch returned to the GI's headquarters, they passed a rifle to each man and 1 bandolier of ammo. With everyone locked and loaded, they headed out to the local jail. Inside the jail, Cantrell and Mansfield had 50 deputies, and they were preparing to sign off on the election. Outside, White and his fighting bunch had arrived and taken up positions. White issued an ultimatum to the deputies to surrender the ballot boxes or be fired upon. The deputies didn't move or make a sound. That's when White and the fighting bunch opened fire and the Battle of Athens had begun. The gun battle would rage through the night. The veterans fired endlessly on the sheriff and his deputies, but they couldn't breach the walls of the jail. Conversely, the deputies were proving to be no match for the recently returned war veterans. As the battle continued, the veterans were getting desperate. They had begun throwing Molotov cocktails, but all they accomplished with this was the destruction of cars on the street. At 2:30 a.m., reinforcements arrived with more firepower: dynamite. The first bundle of dynamite landed under a police car. The charge blew it sky high and it landed on its side. 3 more bundles were thrown simultaneously. 1 landed under the sheriff's car, 1 on the roof of the jail's porch, and 1 hit the jail wall. That final bundle sealed the deal and blew a hole in the building. At 3 a.m., the deputies in the jail came out, surrendered, and handed over the ballot boxes. The veterans rounded up all of the crooked deputies, and after releasing the poll watchers, locked the deputies in the jail. Despite all of the carnage, no one was killed on either side. There were, however, some injuries. Minus Wilburn, who had been paying voters at the 12th precinct, had his throat slashed but survived. Prison Superintendent Biscuit Ferris suffered a shattered jaw from a bullet, and Deputy Wise, who shot Tom Gillespie, was summarily beaten by many in the crowd. At 7:05 a.m., Paul Cantrell sent word that he was conceding the sheriff's race. With that, Knox Henry, the GI Nonpartisan League's candidate, had been elected sheriff in the first honest election in Athens in a decade. The final vote tally was 2,175 votes to 1,270 votes. The 4 other candidates in the GI's party also won their races fair and square. Even though hostilities had ceased, the city of Athens was still uneasy. Rumors swirled that Mansfield was planning an attack to retake the town. As a result, the GIs performed armed patrols in town. Machine gunners were placed on rooftops at the edges of town, and hundreds of men received permits to carry concealed firearms. No retaliation from the corrupt political machine ever materialized. None of the GIs faced legal repercussions for their actions. For that matter, almost all of the deputies got away scot-free too. All except for Deputy Wise, who received a sentence of 1 to 3 years in prison for shooting, but not killing, Tom Gillespie. Every form of tyranny and corruption that motivated the men of Athens County to take up arms and resist their own government exists today and then some. Only the corruption and tyranny we face today is exponentially worse. Today, we as a society have become pacified, lulled to sleep, and desensitized to the fact that the state has been taking our freedoms unawares like a thief in the night. They no longer fear us, evidenced by their ability to rule over the most sacred and personal parts of our lives without limit and with total impunity. The government in McMinn County and the state of Tennessee made the mistake of not fearing its citizens. I would submit to you that the lesson history teaches us is that every so often our government needs a reminder that they should indeed fear us. Has the time come to deliver this reminder? Given the level of corruption we face today, are we justified taking up arms and securing the rights that have been taken from us? I know where I stand. I'll let you come to your own conclusion. Until next time, hold fast, and always remember that when freedom is outlawed, only outlaws will be free.